gorgeous.
Not if you see a pretty picture.
Oh.
Excellent. Good. Good. All right. Well, this is an angle on the Cunningham Pond property that you won't get on the ground and only can get in a virtual format. This is, of course, an aerial view taken by drone. Actually, Lindsay's husband is a drone operator and spent some time out there taking some shots. This is directly above the property, looking down on the pond and looking kind of I would say west-northwest. You can see Mount Monadnock off in the distance, but this can help give you some bearings of where this property is over on the far side of Peterborough. For those who don't know, we purchased the Cunningham Pond Conservation Area, about 100 acres, back in December after a multi-year campaign that involved raising a bunch of money from people all around town and around the region. The town was also instrumental in funding the project as well. This project got kicked off, or at least the initiative was launched in late 2017 when the owners of the property subdivided and sold off 3 house lots on the eastern edge of Cunningham Pond. And that got people's attention that there was still a whole bunch of frontage and acreage on the south side of the pond that they didn't want to lose. And they were able to negotiate a purchase and sale agreement with the owners, and then brought in the Monadnock Conservancy to lead the project and ultimately to buy the property, which we were successful in doing. This is a map to quickly give you a little orientation to the property. As you can, hopefully you can see my cursor, but Route 101 crosses the entire map. Off to the right would be Temple Mountain and Miller State Park. You can see Cunningham Pond here. In yellow is the property boundary itself, with long frontage on Route 101 and this hilltop field. The trail that we'll be following, will be starting from Cunningham Pond Road at the trailhead up here at the top where the P is, following the green trail, then the blue trail, up to the edge of the field, down to the water's edge, along the carriage road, and then reconnecting to the blue and the green that we had hiked that we started on. So we'll go ahead and get started. So your first view of that you're at the property is this sign welcoming you on Cunningham Pond Road. And backing up a little bit, this is what the new parking area entrance looks like. It was built this spring and summer. There's parking easily for about 4 cars, and with some creativity, you could probably squeeze in up to 6. And for the most part, that's been working so far this season. At the edge of the parking area is this new kiosk with that same map that you just saw. And the trail starts right from the edge of it, going down between these 2 boulders and following the green trail marker that you can see there. And the trail really is quite enjoyable. It is not particularly strenuous. The grades are very gentle. It's what I would call rolling terrain, and it winds in a really enjoyable way around boulders and around trees. It's not just a straight line carved through the forest. So it's a really enjoyable path. And this is a good example of what it looks like. That is my wife and dog and friends of ours. And my son is up there somewhere near the front as well. One of my favorite things about this property is the diversity of tree species on it. And so if you've ever been on a hike with me before, you know that I love to stop and talk about natural history trivia along the way. So hopefully we'll find that enjoyable today, because I do want to talk a lot about the different species that are found on this property. So this is not a particularly rare species that we're looking at, but it's showing a really distinctive feature that's key in its identification. This is a red maple, and red maples can come, their bark can come in all different shapes and sizes, but this pattern of what looks like kind of concentric circles of chipped bark chips, some people describe it as looking like a target, is really distinctive of red maple, and it really stood out to me as I got walking down the trail on this day when I took all these pictures. And once you get that picture in your head, you'll never forget it as distinctive of red maple. This is also a red maple, and this is a really curious tree, and there were several like this along the early part of the trail. It almost looks like an upended bar stool. At the base of it, this broad area, and then 4 trunks of about equal age coming up from the 4 corners of this. This is a pretty classic red maple trait, and it's called coppicing. At some point in the past, somebody cut the single trunk that was this red maple off at the base. They harvested the tree, who knows for what, at some point in the past. And red maple loves to resprout from the cut stump. And so these 4 shoots, at some point within a year or 2 after the tree was cut, got their start and grew up about the same size. And not all tree species will do that, but red maple is one that is notorious for doing it. And so you can infer a bit about the past use of a forest patch by looking for patterns just like this. In some parts of Europe, more intensive forestry actually will do this on purpose to cut trees at the stump to cause them to send up multiple coppiced stems, and then after a period of time, all of those stems can be harvested as well, providing a greater density of wood, often for firewood or maybe pulpwood. So moving along, this is a classic, of course, white birch or paper birch, New Hampshire's state tree. This isn't the most healthy looking example, but it was another part of the variety of species that are found on this property, the pretty high variety. Some people may know white birch is certainly around in this region, but found much more commonly at higher elevations and further north. The birches in general are a species of tree that is pretty highly dependent on disturbance for their tiny, tiny wind-dispersed seeds to find a patch of bare soil and to germinate. They're not like acorns or other seeds that have a whole lot of energy that can kind of bide their time to work their way down into the soil through lots of leaf litter or other things. These tiny seeds need to land on a patch of disturbed soil to be able to germinate. And at high elevations and on mountainsides where you've got trees blowing down and tipping and soil and rocks falling down the slope, you get perfect conditions for that kind of disturbance and lots of white birch trees like up in the White Mountains. Down here further south, they're around, but as we've reduced a lot of the disturbing forces on our forests around here, and as they age, we often see that the white birches start to fade out. And that's just a natural part of succession. It's neither good nor bad, but it explains the patterns we see. And there's the crown of it. So we continue along on the trail and come to another curiosity that I was really, really surprised to find on this property. Anybody recognize this tree just from the bark? Feel free to unmute yourself and call it out. Not hearing any takers. This is, well, let's see. What if we do this? Anybody want to try now?
Oak. An oak.
It is not an oak.
No?
No. This is a tree that was dominant in our forests a century ago. One of the most common trees.
Chestnut.
Chestnut. Yeah. So this is American chestnut, which as some of you may know, as I said, was one of the most prolific and dominant trees in the forest in earlier times, and then was wiped out in a really short period of time by a blight. But the individuals do still persist in the forest. They tend not to get very big, and they may get just old enough to get of reproductive age to seed a new generation of young ones, and then tend to die out. But they are around, and so it's a treat when you actually get to find one. The leaves look a lot like beech leaves, but they're longer and thinner, and the points along the margins of the leaf are a little bit more kind of raked almost into a hook of a point. Some of you may know the Monadnock Conservancy has a couple of experimental stands of blight-resistant chestnut trees, hybrids, on property that we own in Gilsum, and those are part of a long-term research project in partnership with the American Chestnut Foundation. All right, moving along down the trail, I really like to identify with bark. Looking at leaves is cheating, so here's another one that's really distinctive. I've seen this one or heard this one described as having bark that looks like burnt cornflakes or burnt potato chips. Anyone know this one?
Black cherry.
Yeah, black cherry.
Yeah,
good.
cherry.
Exactly. Black cherries are certainly around in our flora. They're not the same kind of cherries that you might buy in the grocery store, but they certainly are fruiting cherries. Their fruit is mostly pit, but the birds certainly like them. This is also the cherry that cherry furniture or cabinetry would be made of. I've not seen that cherries, mature cherry trees in our region tend to be quite straight enough or large enough around to make really good lumber for the mills. I think those trees tend to be found further south into Pennsylvania and Appalachia, but they're certainly around, and when you find them, they're enjoyable to see, they're good for the wildlife, and if you're harvesting timber, it can also be really good for furniture if you know somebody who can mill it up for you. Casting our eyes down, there's a pretty significant fern diversity on the property as well. So this is bracken fern, really common in this region, and it's fairly distinctive in that it has a strong stem, and then at the top of it are three main fronds that form kind of a flat plane right at about like knee or thigh height in the forest. When I was younger and was a camp counselor, we used to have a trick to help kids who were being bothered by deer flies in the forest. And we would tell them that if you take a bracken fern frond and cut it off at the base and turn this whole thing upside down on your head, the three fronds will kind of cradle your head and it will keep away the flies. And of course, it doesn't have any sort of effect at keeping away the flies, but the kids are so focused on keeping the thing balanced on their head that they totally forget about the flies bugging them, and they also stop complaining. So keep that one in mind if you ever have somebody really bothered by deer flies. Another fern, not particularly rare, but really distinctive in its shape, that's found at multiple points along this trail, is this one, New York fern. And often found in big spreads of thousands and thousands of them, all lined up in the understory. New York fern is, once you know the trick, you'll never forget it. It's easy to remember because it tapers not only at the far tip of the frond, but also at the base. The leaflets get smaller and smaller going down toward the ground. And if you can remember that New Yorkers burn the candle at both ends, you can remember that this is New York fern, tapered at both ends. And then one more fern, another one of my favorites, royal fern. Royal fern is often found not too far from water, And this one indeed was a few steps away from a stream on the property. So if you go there, you can look out for that one as well. So as we continue along the trail, lots more to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
You come to the first of 3 bridges on the property. Not a whole lot of water this summer to be bridged, but certainly in wetter seasons, these bridges come in quite handy. This bridge and another very similar to it were built last fall by crews from the Student Conservation Association that we hired. SCA is an organization that puts young people to work during the summer and fall as part of experiential learning, and places them all across the country in parks and conserved spaces. And this bridge is built entirely of hemlock. The log stringers are peeled hemlock logs, and the decking is hemlock lumber as well. You soon come on the trail to the first junction point. Going off to the left is a loop through the Goyette property, the Goyette Natural Area, which is a property we've owned for decades, actually. One of the earliest properties donated to us. And it was kind of an orphan on its own until we bought this Cunningham Pond property and were able to connect this trail to it. We're going to turn right, though, and head toward the pond on the Blue Trail. We come to a second bridge, again, of hemlock construction. And then I found this tree on the way. This is pretty neat. So this is a red oak, and you see these lines, these parallel lines of holes across it. Does anybody know what created those holes?
Sapsucker.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. So these holes were created by a yellow-bellied sapsucker, one of our woodpeckers in New England. And I was surprised to see them on a red oak. I haven't often seen them on a red oak before. They're very common on birches, basswoods they seem to love, sometimes apple trees as well. But seeing this on red oak was kind of cool. And they make these really distinctive, very neat and orderly lines around the tree as they're pecking away, presumably going for some sap or other nutrients. The third bridge is built of dimensional lumber. This was built by Monadnock Conservancy staff and our trail consultant with the help of those Student Conservation Association students who carried in the lumber from the nearest road access. This one's across a bigger span of water, so it needed to be a bit more sturdy and lasting. Not a whole lot of big boulders or rocks along this trail, but this one definitely stands out, and that's my son Henry, who never misses an opportunity to climb up on top of something. This is a big glacial erratic boulder that we see all across the landscape here in the Monadnock region. A boulder so effortlessly picked up by a glacier somewhere well north of here, and then dropped as the glacier stalled, and then eventually melted and retreated, leaving these boulders erratically across the landscape. The next junction gives you an opportunity. This is really where the loop part of it takes place. Turning left goes up to the field, turning right goes down to the pond, and we're going to do the whole loop, and we'll start by turning left, going up to the field. And the forest here, just before you get to the field, is really quite different, and I think pretty magical. Those are all New York ferns that carpet underneath the forest canopy there. And as you can see, relatively few shrubby sized trees growing in there of any younger age. And another distinctive characteristic is that this forest in that spot is dominated by this tree, big-toothed aspen, a relative of the quaking aspen. And, you know, who knows what may have led to this patch of forest being so different. There's probably some sort of different management history. Maybe the field that this is on the edge of once was larger, and therefore this patch was more recently abandoned. But maybe just by some luck, after the last time that field was run over by some heavy equipment or something, a good crop of aspen seeds blew in and started this stand that is occupying there now. But the bark of big-toothed aspen is pretty distinctive, as are the leaves. They look like a quaking aspen leaf and also quake, just like a quaking aspen leaf, but have these teeth around the margins there. Because aspen is such a disturbance-dependent species, there aren't any young aspens seeding into that patch of forest, but up at the edge of the field, which we'll go to next, they are still reproducing right on the margins. And so after that stand of aspens, you pop out into this beautiful hilltop field with broad views. This is looking east. This kind of saddle in the hillside is where Route 101 goes up between Miller State Park and Monadnock on the left. And on the right is Temple Mountain. And there's a little cell tower at the top of Temple Mountain, the former ski area. And this is what you see when you look hard left along the field edge. And then looking over to the right, the trail continues along the edge of the field. And as you get further along, the views get even more expansive, especially looking back toward the east. So there are the towers on top of Monadnock, and of course the trails and the auto road that lead all the way up to that point. The field here is managed for hay, but it's starting to show signs that the soil is becoming depleted from lack of inputs like manure or other things like that, and from constant haying. And the soil is getting depleted, it is making way for some species that are our benefit. So these are dewberries, a kind of seedy, very seedy relative of black raspberries that grow low to the ground in old fields like this and other really nutrient poor soils. There's also a goodly amount of poison ivy growing in from the edges on that field too. We are soon to enter into a long-term lease with the Connolly Brothers Dairy Farm in Temple. They have hayed and managed that field for about 35 years, but never had the long-term security of knowing that they would always have long-term access to this field to be investing in improving the soil and maybe even reseeding the hay crop. But with the lease that we're soon to enter into with them, we hope it'll give them the security to know that they're going to have access to that field, and they're looking forward to improving the grass that is growing there. We're also looking at keeping a portion of the field in more of a wildflower meadow for pollinators. And the bobolinks, grassland-dependent bird species, were out in force on this field earlier this year, and the Connolly brothers have agreed to participate in a program of delaying their first mowing of the field to allow the bobolinks to fledge. There are a couple structures on that field, and in time, they all will be removed. In the background is the old Peterson family lodge, which is in pretty rough shape, and so we have plans to remove that. We don't have a good programmatic use for it, and it probably would be attracting abuse anyway. In the foreground, though, is this really cool log cabin. Rumor has it that this cabin was originally the telegraph office in either Wilton or Milford, and I always forget which one it was. It was one of those two, or so I've been told by the Peterson family. And when it was no longer in use for anything anymore, I think it was free for the taking, and so brothers Walter and John Peterson put it on a trailer and brought it up and put it into this field, where it's been a storage shed in more recent years. We are looking at possibly auctioning or otherwise making this available for anyone who wants to relocate it to their property so that it can have a new home and a new use. At the end of the field, the trail ducks back into the forest and descends down to the edge of the pond to connect with the old carriage road. This carriage road once encircled the entire Cunningham Pond, and once the land was broken up along the edges, and when the pond ceased to be a public water supply for the town of Peterborough, portions of the carriage road became inaccessible or cut off. But this entire south shore on our frontage is now reopened for access and walking, and it's very gentle, wide, and open. Across the pond at points, you can see the Peterborough Town Beach on the north shore of the pond. The fact that the beach is on Cunningham Pond was a big reason why there was such tremendous community support for us buying and conserving this property. Folks knew that by conserving so much of the South Shore and the forest above it, that we could help maintain the really excellent water quality of the pond for fishing and swimming and boating. And of course, the view from the beach looks directly across at this land that we've now conserved, and will remain that unbroken view from the beach. As you wind along on the carriage road, there are some really tall trees and some glimpses through the relatively unbroken forest along the edge of the pond out onto the water. A couple of areas where you can walk out on the rocks and poke around. A few blueberry bushes here and there, and some really nice views up and down along the shoreline. So we're coming back to rejoin the old part of the trail, so a few more things to point out. This is a curious thing that I noticed on this tree that has a trail marker on it. This is a black birch that seems to be growing on a mound of dirt. And you might ask yourself, why is this tree growing on what looks like a falling apart mound of dirt, and why are its roots kind of acting like stilts almost? And this is a birch, a black birch, doing exactly what birches love to do, which was it got its start, or they got their start, on top of what was probably an big old stump or a rotting log that has slowly turned to soil underneath the trees as they grew. But early on, the trees sent down their roots all around that stump or log to reach the mineral soil below. And then as that hunk of wood, whatever it was, is slowly decomposing under them, eventually that area will become a bit of a hollow underneath. And this is something you'll often find under different birch trees. A little bit closer view there too. All right, the next picture is right out of a nature documentary, and if you're a little squeamish, you might want to cover your eyes, but we came upon a thing that my son thought was super cool, so we had to photograph it. We found a garter snake, but this garter snake was enjoying a meal right at this moment, and if you look carefully, you can see that a poor toad is up to his armpits in in this garter snake's mouth. The snake clearly caught it from behind and was slowly engulfing this rather large toad relative to the snake. And you know, though unfortunate for the toad, it was really neat to see this example of what garter snakes eat in the forest. Couple more trees on our way back to the point of beginning, now looking at some conifers. This bark looks not too dissimilar from the black cherry, but this is instead red spruce. And there's a fair amount of red spruce on this property in the mix with other conifers like hemlocks and white pines. Here's a young red spruce to see a different angle on it. Looks like a classic kind of Christmas tree shape. When you look closely at red spruce needles, you'll find that one, they're sharp. If you grab a handful of red spruce twigs, it'll hurt. But two, that the needles are held in a circle around the perimeter of every twig. And this is an important contrast with another species that I'll show. In fact, this one. This is a balsam fir, and red spruce and balsam fir are often found near one another. And balsam fir, in contrast, has much softer, less sharp needles. You can grab a handful and it won't bother you at all. And the needles are also held and more of a flat plane from the twig from either side, in contrast to the red spruce. So if I hold them side by side, on the right is the balsam fir, where the needles are more or less just held to the sides of the twig, whereas the red spruce needles fully encircle the twig, pointing up, down, and to all sides. Another difference is that if you took a single red spruce needle and rolled it between your fingers, you'd be able to do so because they're actually square in profile. A balsam fir needle is flat, and so if you put it between your fingers and tried to roll it, it wouldn't work. Balsam fir bark is also somewhat distinctive and kind of fun. So this is a close-up on the stem of a balsam fir, and you can see these little bubbles or blisters, and these have sap underneath them. And when I was a kid, I used to try to lure an unassuming friend up next to me, and if you have really good aim, you can push with your thumb on one of these little sap blisters and pop it and make a little jet of sticky sap shoot out, ideally not on you, but on the person standing next to you. It was a great trick, though often I misaimed and hit myself anyway, and last laugh was on me. In centuries in the past, industrious kids would scrape away at the bark of balsam fir trees to get at these sap bubbles and collect enough sap that they could go into town and sell that sap to the druggist or the apothecary, who would use that sap to make cough drops or other, home remedies of the time. The other neat thing that I witnessed about the balsam firs out there is this pattern of the growth of the tree. So if you look at this balsam fir, at the ground, there's a pretty healthy growth of low-growing balsam down at the ground. Then in the middle, it's pretty spare looking. And then it's harder to see here, but up near the top of the tree, there's more foliage again of those needles. And this is a pretty classic indication of deer browsing pressure, because in the winter time, there's snow cover covering all of this fir vegetation and the ground, so it's protected. But right at about our human waist and chest height, about the height of where a deer's head would be, the balsam fir has been picked pretty clean. And then of course high up where the deer can't reach, there's more robust growth again. And then finally, we make our way back up the trail and back to the point of the beginning. And that's the Cunningham Pond Conservation Area. Anybody have any questions about the property or anything I talked about, or other observations or corrections of any maybe scientific mistake I made?
How long is the trail?
Great question. It is, let me, I'm going to get back to the, that's not what I want to do. I want to get back to the start of the slideshow. And I will pull up the map for myself and remind myself of the mileages. So that route that we just walked is a total of, let's see, there's about 1 mile, a little more than 1.5 miles that we just did altogether, including the loop and back out again.
So Ryan, this is Steve. I may have missed some of the discussion earlier, or even in the email. Sorry about that. Could you discuss a little bit of the finances of where the money came from for the purchase and that sort of thing? Was there a major donor? How did it come about?
Are you a fundraiser or something like that?
I've got it in my head. I never stop.
Of course. Yeah, great question. So It
Can't
was a
help
pretty
himself.
broad, classic, multifaceted campaign. So there were a little over 250, I think, individual donations from individual donors, ranging in size from $5 up to the highest individual donation was $250,000. And then the town also, quite miraculously, also put in $250,000 out of their conservation fund, which was 5 times larger than the largest expenditure they had made for any conservation project in town. So that was saying a lot about the meaning of this project.
And what was the total cost?
We bought the property for $1.325 million. The total campaign was about $1.5 million with costs and the funds for us to support our long-term management of the property.
Was there any donation on the part of the owners, or was that pure fair market value purchase?
There was donation, but it was only by chance. The originally negotiated purchase price of $1.325 million called for the property to be appraised soon afterward to verify that it was an appropriate price for a nonprofit organization to pay, and it appraised for $1.365 million. And the margin of difference was enough that it didn't call for in the agreement to renegotiate, and so there happened to be a little bit of a discount there.
Okay, last question. How long
Sure.
was the process, start to finish?
So we were first brought in let's see, it was the spring of, no, I guess it was it was late in 2018, and then we closed on the property in December of 2019. So it was about a year and a half, actually, all in.
That actually seems a little quick to me. Would that be a normal time frame for you?
You know, maybe it's just that it really felt long for me. The original purchase and sale agreement had a much more aggressive time frame that it became apparent that it wasn't going to be able to be met. But fortunately, the sellers agreed to an extension.
Right. Thanks. Well done.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
So I learned a lot. That was great. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
have a question about the diamond-shaped trail markers.
Yeah.
I'm doing a property in Ringe, and I'm just wondering, do you have any idea where I could get some?
Absolutely. So there's a company in Manlius, New York, which happens to be where I grew up, called Voss Signs, VOSS.
Yes.
And they make custom and ready-made signs for pretty much every land trust in the country. And you can buy boxes and boxes of those diamond-shaped trail markers in whatever color you want.
Okay, great.
And they have a good website for ordering online.
All right, and that's where I was looking, so I'm glad that you recommend them.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And you went with the, I think it's the 5x7 size, not the 9x12.
Yeah.
The smaller.
5x7 was I think what we chose.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
And use make sure you use aluminum nails in your when you hammer into the trees, and keep the heads of the nails pretty proud away from the wood. That'll give the tree some room to grow before it swallows up the nails and the marker. And aluminum will also be safer if, in the event that tree is ever being cut up by somebody with a chainsaw or something like that, aluminum won't destroy their saw or cause a dangerous kickback where as a steel or an iron nail would.
So it's like aluminum with a good size head on it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and maybe 2 inches?
That would be plenty. I think the ones we use might be like 1.5 inches.
Okay.
You can probably get them from Boss.
Yeah, you might be able to get them from the same company.
Okay.
Others? These are great questions.
It was really informative. Thank you. I look forward to walking on it.
Thanks, Jill.
Thanks for coming. Ryan, do you know off the top of your head how big that historical building is up on the field of Cunningham Pond?
Oh, so that old log cabin.
The log cabin, yeah.
Yeah, it is probably, I'm gonna guess about maybe 8 by 7 or 8 by 6 in its dimensions. It's pretty small.
Well, thank you from me. It was really very interesting, and I'm looking forward to for the first walk there. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that cabin, if I had known about that when I was a little kid, I would have insisted my father put it on the Calhoun Forest.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
It's charming. It probably needs a few layers of logs at the base replaced, but it has a lot of potential.
Ryan, thank you for a very informative and fun hike around the pond. It's really lovely, and it was interesting to hear all your descriptions of the various trees from their bark.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Okay.
It means a
not
lot
even
coming from
winded.
a pro leader like Anne. What was that, Kathy?
I said, and I'm not even winded.
No bug bites.